The morning of Chukwuebuka Okonkwo's wedding, a little boy walked up to him during the ceremony, looked him dead in the eye and said, "You are my daddy now." Chukwuebuka had never seen this child before in his life, but his bride, the woman in the white dress standing right beside him, she had. She knew exactly who that child was, and the way the color drained from her face in that moment told Chukwuebuka everything he needed to know before she even opened her mouth. If you are the kind of person who believes that love is enough to hold a marriage together, this story will challenge everything you think you know. Stay with me. And if you are new here, hit that subscribe button now, because the stories we tell on this channel are the kind that will keep you up at night thinking. Chukwuebuka Okonkwo was 34 years old when he met Ngozi Adana Obiora. He was not a man who believed in coincidences. He was an engineer, practical, methodical, the kind of man who measured twice and cut once. He had built his life that way. Every decision deliberate, every relationship carefully considered. He was not impulsive. He was not reckless, which is exactly why what happened to him felt so impossible, because a man like Chukwuebuka should have seen the signs. He met Ngozi at Lagos Island General Hospital, of all places. He had gone in for a routine check on his father, Chief Boniface Okonkwo, who had been admitted for mild hypertension. Ngozi was the attending nurse. She was efficient, calm, precise in the way that only people who have truly mastered their craft can be. She explained his father's condition in clear language without being condescending. She answered every question without rushing. And when Chief Boniface, who was old-fashioned and proud and difficult in the way that old men sometimes are, complained that the hospital food tasted like wet cement, Ngozi had laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a professional laugh, a real, warm, unguarded laugh that transformed her entire face. Chukwuebuka noticed. He did not approach her that day. He was not that kind of man. He came back the next day and the day after, ostensibly to check on his father. But Chief Boniface's blood pressure was stabilizing. There was no medical reason to return so frequently. They both knew it. On the fourth day, Ngozi met him in the corridor and said, without looking up from her clipboard, "Your father is doing very well. You do not need to come back until Friday." Chukwuebuka said, "What if I am not just coming for my father?" She looked up then. Her eyes were steady. "Then you should say so." So he said so. They began slowly. Lunch once a week, then twice, then phone calls that stretched past midnight until one of them fell asleep still holding the phone. Ngozi was private, not in a cold or distant way, but in the way of someone who had learned to guard themselves carefully. She shared things gradually, the way you peel an orange, layer by layer, never all at once. She told him she was from Nnewi originally, that her mother had died when she was 16, that she had worked her way through nursing school on scholarships and part-time jobs. She told him she valued honesty above everything else. That last part, Chukwuebuka would remember later. She valued honesty above everything else. There were things she did not tell him in those early months. He did not know this at the time. He did not know because Ngozi was extraordinarily careful. She kept her private life in separate compartments. Her colleagues at the hospital knew one version of her neighbors in Surulere knew another, and Chukwuebuka knew the version she chose to show him. He was not aware there were other versions. He proposed after 14 months. It was not a dramatic proposal. He did not hire a band or scatter rose petals across a restaurant floor. He took her to the beach at sunset, just the two of them, and he said, "I have thought carefully about my life. I have thought about what I want, and what I want is to build something with you. I am asking you to marry me." Ngozi was quiet for a long moment. The waves came and went. The light on the water turned from orange to gold. She said, "Yes." But here's what Chukwuebuka did not notice, what he would replay in his mind 1,000 times later, was that she had hesitated. Not a small emotional hesitation, a long, weighted one, the kind that carries something heavy inside it. He had assumed it was emotion. He had been wrong. The wedding preparations took 8 months. Chief Boniface, who had recovered fully and had since declared Ngozi the best thing to enter this family since my own wife, threw himself into the planning with an enthusiasm that delighted everyone. Chukwuebuka's mother, Mama Adaora, a tall, sharp-eyed woman who missed nothing and said twice what she thought, approved of Ngozi cautiously. She liked the girl, she said, but she also said once to her son privately that there was something she could not name, a guardedness. That girl is carrying something. I cannot tell you what, but something is there. Chukwuebuka had dismissed it as his mother's natural suspicion of any woman who entered his son's orbit. He should have listened. On Ngozi's side, the preparations were quieter. Her father, a retired teacher named Mr. Obiora, was gracious and warm. She had 2 younger sisters who cried at the engagement dinner and a handful of close friends from nursing school who were designated as her bridal party. Nobody from Ngozi's past appeared. Nobody before nursing school. No old neighbors, no childhood friends, no family from her mother's side. Chukwuebuka had thought this was simply because Ngozi was a private person. He had not thought to find it strange that her entire visible history seemed to begin with nursing school. The wedding was held on a Saturday in December. The venue was a hall in Victoria Island with tall windows that let in the morning light. There were 300 guests. The decor was ivory and gold. Ngozi's dress was cathedral length, and when she walked down the aisle holding her father's arm, Chukwuebuka felt his chest tighten in a way that he had no words for. He was so focused on her face that he almost missed the moment when the little boy appeared. Almost. The ceremony had been going for 40 minutes. They were in the middle of the exchange of vows. The pastor had just asked Chukwuebuka to repeat after him, and Chukwuebuka had been looking into Ngozi's eyes, speaking the words with the steadiness that was natural to him, when he felt a small hand touch his trouser leg.
He looked down. There was a boy standing beside him. 4 years old, perhaps 5. He had large, serious eyes and a small, solemn face. He was dressed neatly, a little white shirt, small black trousers, small shoes that were slightly too big for his feet. He was not crying. He was not lost. He looked perfectly composed, as though he had walked up to Chukwuebuka with complete intention. He looked up at Chukwuebuka and said, in a small, clear voice, "You are my daddy now." The hall went silent. Not gradually, instantly, as though someone had switched off all sound at once. 300 people held their breaths simultaneously. Chukwuebuka looked at the boy. Then he looked at Ngozi. And that was when he saw it. That was the moment everything cracked open. Because Ngozi's face, the face of the woman he had just been exchanging vows with, the woman who told him she valued honesty above everything else, had gone completely white. And it was not the white of shock. It was not the white of someone who does not know what is happening. It was the white of someone who knows exactly what is happening and has been dreading it for a very long time. She knew this child. She knew him. The boy was still holding Chukwuebuka's trouser leg. Someone in the back of the hall began to whisper. The whisper spread like a current of water through the crowd. Chief Boniface, seated in the front row, was perfectly still. Mama Adaora was not still. Mama Adaora had leaned forward and her eyes were moving between the child and her son's face and Ngozi's face with the rapid calculation of a woman putting pieces together in real time. The pastor cleared his throat. Chukwuebuka crouched down to the boy's level. He was aware that 300 people were watching him. He was aware that his entire wedding had just changed into something else. But he crouched down because the boy was a child, and whatever was happening here was not the boy's fault. He said quietly, "What is your name, son?" The boy said, "Tobenna." Chukwuebuka said, "Tobenna, where is your mother?" The boy turned and pointed. He pointed toward the back of the hall, past the rows of guests who had all turned to look. And there, near the entrance, standing half inside and half outside, as though she had not fully committed to being here, was a woman. She was perhaps 28. She was not dressed for a wedding. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair tied back plainly. She had the look of someone who had rehearsed coming here many times and still was not sure she should have come. Her eyes were fixed on Ngozi. Ngozi had gone rigid. Chukwuebuka stood up slowly. He did not speak loudly, but in the absolute silence of that hall, everyone heard him when he said to Ngozi, "Who is that woman?" Ngozi's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He said, "And who is this child?" The silence stretched. And then something happened that nobody in that hall expected. The woman at the back, the one in the blue dress, she walked forward, down the aisle, past all the guests, past the flowers and the ivory ribbons and the wedding candles. She walked until she was standing in the open space before the altar, and she looked at Ngozi and she said, in a voice that was completely steady, "Tell him, Ngozi, tell him the truth, or I will." If you are watching this right now and you think you know where this is going, I promise you, you do not, because this story has layers. This is the part where we pause for 1 second because what comes next is the part that changes everything. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, this is the time. Hit that button now, because what that woman was about to reveal was not what anyone in that hall thought it was. The woman's name was Sochima, and she was not Tobenna's mother. She was her aunt. Tobenna's actual mother had died 18 months earlier. Her name had been Ifeoma, Sochima's younger sister. And Ifeoma, before she died of complications from a difficult second pregnancy, had told Sochima a secret she had been carrying for almost 5 years, a secret that involved Ngozi. Here is what Sochima told the whole that December morning, in a voice that did not waver once. Ifeoma and Ngozi were close friends, not the kind of close friends that drift apart after school. They were the kind of close friends who knew each other's passwords, who called each other at 2 in the morning, who kept each other's darkest truths. They had met in their first year of nursing training and had been inseparable for 3 years. In the 4th year, Ifeoma began a relationship with a man named Obinna. Obinna was charming and unreliable, and the kind of man who made women fall in love with him and then became confused by the consequences. Ifeoma fell hard. She got pregnant. Obinna had proposed when he heard, but before the wedding could happen, he had discovered something that destroyed him. He had discovered that the baby was not his. Ifeoma, in a moment of loneliness during one of Obinna's many disappearing acts, had been with another man. One time, one terrible, regretted, irreversible time. The baby she was carrying, little Tobenna, was not Obinna's child. But Ifeoma was too afraid to tell Obinna. So she had told Ngozi. She had confessed everything to her best friend and asked for help. And Ngozi, who worked in the hospital, who had access to certain records, who knew certain people in the system, Ngozi had helped her, not in the way a good friend helps, in a specific, calculated way. Ngozi had helped Ifeoma alter Tobenna's birth documentation.
Tobenna's biological father, his real father, had been listed on those documents as unknown, erased, replaced with ambiguity. Because the real father, the man Ifeoma had been with that one time, had since moved on, had built a life, and Ifeoma had decided she would not pursue it. She would raise her son and move forward. Obinna had eventually left anyway. He could not reconcile himself to the uncertainty, and Ifeoma had been left to raise Tobenna alone. She had managed, barely, with Sochima's help, and then the second pregnancy had come, unplanned, with a different man who was also not present, and Ifeoma had not survived it. On her deathbed, Ifeoma had told Sochima everything. She had told Sochima who Tobena's real father was. She had told Sochima what Ngozi had helped her do, and she had made Sochima promise to make a way to make sure Tobena knew where he came from. Sochima had spent a year looking, following the threads, trying to find the man whose name had been removed from her nephew's history. And what she had found 2 months ago was this. The man Ifeoma had been with that one night, the man who unknowingly fathered Tobena, had built a life, gotten engaged, and was now standing at the altar of a Victoria Island wedding hall. His name was not Chukwuebuka. Let that sit with you for a moment. The man Sochima was looking for was not the groom. He was the best man. His name was Ifeanyi Uchenna. He was standing 3 feet to Chukwuebuka's left, in his groomsman's suit, and he had gone so still that he looked like a photograph of himself. And Ngozi, the bride, had known. She had known for months that Ifeanyi was Tobena's father. She had known because she had helped Ifeoma erase his name from those records. She had known because she had been carrying that secret for 5 years, and when Chukwuebuka had introduced her to Ifeanyi, his best friend, his closest friend since secondary school, she had recognized him immediately. Recognized him and said nothing. She had recognized the man whose name she had helped remove from a child's birth record, and she had smiled and shaken his hand at a dinner party and said nothing. Because telling would have meant explaining, and explaining would have meant confessing, and confessing would have meant losing everything. The hall was no longer silent. It was a storm of murmuring voices, shifting chairs, gasps. Chief Boniface had stood up from his seat. Mama Adara had her hand pressed to her mouth. Ifeanyi was shaking. He was looking at the boy, at Tobena, who was standing quietly near Chukwuebuka, still holding the edge of his trouser leg as though it were a rope in rough water. And something was happening on Ifeanyi's face that had no name. It was not denial. It was something much more complicated than denial. It was the look of a man seeing something that has always been true, finally becoming visible. Chukwuebuka turned to Ngozi. He did not shout. He was not a man who shouted. He said, very quietly, so that only she could hear, "How long have you known?" She did not answer immediately. He said, "Ngozi, look at me. How long have you known that Tobena was Ifeanyi's son?" She whispered, "Since the day you introduced us." Chukwuebuka closed his eyes briefly. He opened them. He said, "And you said nothing?" She said, "I was afraid." He said, "Of what?" She said, "Of losing you, of losing everything I had worked for, of having to explain something that I could not undo." He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the woman in the white dress, the woman who had laughed with his father in a hospital corridor, the woman who had said she valued honesty above everything else. He looked at her and he tried to find the person he had known inside the face of the person standing before him now. They looked the same. They were not the same. He took a step back from her. Just one step, but in that hall, with 300 witnesses, one step was a language everyone understood. He turned to Ifeanyi. Ifeanyi had crouched down and was looking at Tobena. Up close, what had been a vague general resemblance became something specific and undeniable. The shape of the eyes, the particular angle of the brow, the serious, composed quality that little Tobena carried. It was Ifeanyi's quality, worn on a smaller face. Ifeanyi looked up to Chukwuebuka. Chukwuebuka said, "Did you know?" Ifeanyi said, "No. I swear to God, I did not know." And this, the witnesses would agree later, was the truest thing said in that hall all morning. What followed was not a scene from a film, though it had the quality of one. The pastor gently stepped aside. Sochima sat down in one of the chairs near the aisle with Tobena on her lap, and she spoke quietly to the family members who gathered around her.
Chief Boniface moved through the crowd with the dignity of a man who has seen many things and intends to handle this one carefully. Mama Adara, who was many things, was above all else a woman who understood that children were never to be made collateral in adult disasters, and she went straight to Tobena and spoke to him softly and made sure he had something to eat and drink. The guests slowly, quietly, found their way out of the hall, not because anyone asked them to, but because this had become something private, and even 300 people can recognize when they are witnessing something that does not belong to them. Chukwuebuka and Ngozi sat across from each other in a small anteroom off the main hall. No one else was present. The wedding flowers could be seen through the window, ivory and gold, untouched and purposeless. This is the conversation that happened. Chukwuebuka said, "I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning. Not what you think I want to hear. Everything." And Ngozi told him.
She told him about Ifeoma, about the friendship, about the secret she had been trusted with, about the decision she had made to help erase Ifeanyi's name from those records. She told him she had believed she was protecting her friend. She had told herself it was loyalty. She had told herself that Ifeoma had reasons, and that those reasons were not her business to judge. She told him that when she met Ifeanyi at Chukwuebuka's dinner party, she had felt the floor fall away beneath her feet. She had gone home that night and she had almost told Chukwuebuka everything. Almost. But then, she had thought about what telling would mean, not just for her, but for Ifeanyi, who had built a career and a reputation and a life without any knowledge of this child. She told herself she was protecting him too. She had convinced herself that protecting everyone meant protecting her silence. Chukwuebuka listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You told yourself many things." She said, "Yes." He said, "But the thing you never told yourself, the thing you never once considered, was what would happen to that child, Tobena. A boy growing up without knowing where he came from, without a father, without a name." Ngozi did not answer. Chukwuebuka said, "You helped take his history away from him, not to protect him, not even really to protect Ifeoma or Ifeanyi. You did it because it was easier, and then you kept the secret because it was easier, and you planned to take those vows with me today and carry this into our marriage because what, Ngozi? Because you thought it would never come out?" She said very quietly, "I thought Sochima did not know." He said, "You thought?" She said, "Yes." He stood up. He walked to the window. Outside, some of the decorative staff were beginning to dismantle things, not sure what else to do. He watched a man carefully remove an ivory ribbon from a pillar and fold it with more care than the moment required. He turned back to her. He said, "I loved you. I want you to know that. I chose you deliberately. I did not rush. I thought about it carefully because that is how I do everything. And I chose you." She began to cry then, not performatively, quietly, the way someone cries when they are not trying to be seen but cannot stop it. He said, "But I cannot build a life on a foundation that was never solid. I cannot begin a marriage that started with the secret you just told me. Not because I am hard, but because I know myself. I know that I would wonder every time something private was kept from me. Every time I sensed you hesitating before you spoke, I would wonder what else you were carrying. And I cannot live that way. I will not." She said, "People make mistakes. I made a terrible mistake. I know that." He said, "You made a decision. Over and over again, for months, you made a decision. That is not a mistake. A mistake is something that happens once, in a moment before you can stop it. You had 1,000 moments to stop this. You chose not to." She had no answer for that. He said, "I am going home. I need time. Do not call me tonight." He picked up his jacket from the chair. He paused at the door, and then he said something that would stay with Ngozi for the rest of her life. He said, "I hope Tobena finds what he deserves." And he walked out. In another room in that same building, Ifeanyi was sitting with Sochima and Tobena.
He had asked carefully if he could speak to the boy. Sochima had studied him for a long moment, with the eyes of a woman who has been betrayed by trusting people too quickly and had no intention of making that mistake twice. And then she had nodded. Ifeanyi sat down on the floor, so he was at Tobena's level. Tobena looked at him with those serious, composed eyes. Ifeanyi said, "Your name is Tobena." The boy said, "Yes." Ifeanyi said, "That is a strong name." The boy considered this. He said, "Auntie Sochima says it means my father is good." The air went out of him slowly, like water from a cracked cup. He said, "Yes, that's what it means." He looked at this child, this boy who had been walking around the world for 4 years carrying his eyes and his brow and his serious way of holding himself, and who had not known and would never know the years that had been taken from them both. And Ifeanyi felt something that was bigger than grief and smaller than rage, and had the particular quality of something that cannot be undone. He said, "I am going to need some time to understand everything, but I want you to know I am not going anywhere." Tobena looked at him steadily. He said, "The man in the nice suit said you are my daddy." Ifeanyi said, "Who said that?" Tobena pointed vaguely. Then he said, "I told the other man in the nice suit he was my daddy. But Auntie Sochima said no. She said the right daddy was someone else. She said I would know him when I saw him." Ifeanyi's throat closed. He managed to say, "And did you know me when you saw me?" Tobena tilted his head the way children do when they are considering something seriously. Then he said, "Your face looks like mine." Ifeanyi put his face in his hands. Sochima placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. She did not speak. She did not need to. This is the part of the story that most people, when they hear it, find hardest to sit with. Not the betrayal. Betrayals, terrible as they are familiar. What people find hardest is the cost, the specific unrecoverable cost of 5 years of a relationship between a father and a son that existed and did not exist at the same time, that was real and was denied. You cannot give those years back. There's no correction for them. You can only build forward from where you are, and building forward costs something too. What happened in the weeks that followed was not simple, and it was not clean, because nothing real ever is.
Chukwuebuka did not return Ngozi's calls for the first 2 weeks. He was not cruel about it. He sent a message saying he needed space to think, and he meant it. He spent those 2 weeks doing what he always did when he needed to understand something. He sat with it. He worked. He talked to his father, who was old enough to know that wisdom is rarely available immediately after pain. Chief Boniface, who had liked Ngozi, said, "The question you need to ask yourself is not whether she made a mistake. We have all made mistakes. The question is whether the person she showed you was ever real. Because if the love was real, even if the silence was wrong, that is different from if the whole thing was a performance." It was the right question. Chukwuebuka thought about it for 14 days. At the end of those 14 days, he called Ngozi. They met at a quiet restaurant, not the beach, not anywhere with significance attached to it, a plain, neutral place. He said, "I have something to ask you, and I need you to answer honestly, not the way you think I want to hear, honestly." She said, "Okay." He said, "When you were with me, when we were together all those months, was any of it about the secret? Was any of it about what you were hiding?" She looked at him for a long time before she answered. Then she said, "In the beginning, no. I fell in love with you genuinely. I did not plan to. It happened and I was glad. But as things got more serious, when you proposed, yes, there was a part of me that knew I should tell you and chose not to. And I told myself it was because I was protecting things, but I know now that I was also protecting my own comfort, my own fear." He said, "Thank you for saying that." She said, "What does that mean for us?" He said, "I do not know yet." And that, for the time being, was the truth. Ifeanyi's path was different. He was not angry at Ngozi in the way that a stranger would expect. He had always been a man of complicated feelings and slow conclusions. What he felt mostly was a grief that did not have a clean address.
He grieved for Ifeoma, who had been afraid and alone and made choices from that fear. He grieved for himself, for the version of himself who might have stepped up if someone had simply told him the truth. He met with Sochima 3 times in the first month. He did not ask for a paternity test immediately. He did not need one. The evidence of his own face reflected in the boys was sufficient. But he arranged for one eventually through proper legal channels, because if he was going to do this, he was going to do it correctly. The test confirmed what everyone in that hall had seen with their own eyes. He filed for parental recognition. Sochima, who had no desire to keep Tobena from his father, supported it. She only asked that the transition be handled gently, with time and care, because Tobena had already lost too much. Ifeanyi agreed. He was not a man who needed to claim things loudly. He needed to earn them. He began spending time with Tobena carefully. Saturdays at first, in neutral places, letting the boys set the pace. Tobena was serious and watchful and slow to warm, but once he warmed completely. By the 3rd month, he had started calling Ifeanyi Uncle Daddy, which was the kind of imprecise but emotionally accurate title that only children can coin. By the 6th month, he had dropped the uncle. This is the part of the story where some people expect resolution to mean return, that Chukwuebuka and Ngozi would find their way back to each other, because love's supposed to conquer, and because the mistake, though large, was not without context. And this is where the story refuses to be what people expect. Chukwuebuka and Ngozi did not get back together, not because the love was not real, it had been real on both sides, but because Chukwuebuka, who was a man who measured twice and cut once, who was deliberate about every important decision in his life, understood something about himself that he could not change. He needed to trust completely, or he could not trust at all. Not partial trust, not trust with reservations, the kind of trust that does not hold its breath in quiet moments. And that trust, once broken at the foundation, could not be rebuilt in the same structure. You could build something new. You could not restore what had been. He told her this in the same plain, neutral restaurant 3 months after the wedding that did not happen. He said, "I think you are a good person who did a wrong thing and then did not know how to undo it. I think you told yourself stories to make the silence bearable. I think the love you had for me was genuine, and I think you are going to be a different person because of this. Not because pain automatically teaches people things, but because I think you are actually looking at yourself clearly now, maybe for the first time, and I respect that." She was crying, but quietly. He said, "I cannot be your husband, but I do not hate you, and I do not wish you poorly." She said, "Is that enough?" He said, "For now, it has to be." What happened to Ngozi in the year that followed is the part of the story that people do not always wait for, but is perhaps the most important part. Because Ngozi did not collapse, she did not become a cautionary tale that existed only as a warning to others. She went back to work at the hospital. She found a therapist, something she had always told herself she did not need, and she began the long, uncomfortable process of understanding how she had become someone who could hold a secret like that for so long, not to excuse it, to understand it, because understanding is the only thing that prevents repetition. She visited Sochima. She was terrified to do it, but she went. She sat across from the woman who walked into her wedding and dismantled her life and said, "I am sorry. Not for the outcome. I think the outcome was necessary. I am sorry for what I helped take from Tobena, from Ifeanyi. I cannot give those years back, I know that, but I want you to know that I know." Sochima studied her for a long time. Then she said, "Ifeoma was my sister. She made mistakes. She was afraid and she made choices from fear, and she leaned on you and you let her lean the wrong way. You are both young, you are both afraid. That does not make it right, but I am not going to parry hatred for the rest of my life because my nephew needs me present, not consumed." She paused. Then she said, "Do not do it again to anyone. Whatever the reason, whatever the story you tell yourself, do not do it again." Ngozi said, "I will not."
And she meant it. Chief Boniface Okonkwo, who had started all of this by having blood pressure issues that required hospitalization, who had sat in the front row of his son's wedding and watched the most dramatic morning of his long life unfold with the stillness of a man who has survived many things. Chief Boniface said something in the privacy of his home to Mama Adara that she would repeat to Chukwuebuka years later. He said, "Truth has no patience. You can lock it in a room and guard the door, but it will find a window. It always finds a window. The question is never if it comes out. The question is whether you are standing when it does." Tobena, little Tobena with the two big shoes and the serious face and the name that meant "my father is good," grew up knowing his father. Not the fantasy of a father, not a name on a document, but an actual man who showed up on Saturday mornings and asked what he was learning in school and disagreed with his taste in music and made him try vegetables he did not like. An actual man who sometimes got things wrong and apologized for it. An actual, imperfect, present man. Which is everything a child actually needs. Chukwuebuka did not remain alone. He was not the kind of man who stays closed after something breaks him. He was the kind of man who eventually rebuilds differently with what he has learned. 2 years later, he met someone. Her name is not part of this story because her chapter is its own. But it is enough to say that he was more careful this time, not in the way of a man who has become suspicious, but in the way of a man who has learned to pay attention to what people don't say as much as what they do. He is paying attention, and he is happy. There is a version of this story where the wedding goes forward, where Tobena stays in the back of the hall with Sochima and no one speaks, where Ngozi and Chukwuebuka take their vows and cut the cake and dance and begin a marriage that is from its first morning carrying something it cannot name. Where Ifeanyi grows old never knowing he has a son, where Tobena grows up never knowing his father. That version exists. It has existed in different forms, in different families, in different houses, in different rooms where the wrong person decided that silence was the same thing as peace. It is not the same thing. Silence is just noise that has learned to stay still. The truth that walked into that wedding hall in December on the small feet of a boy in two big shoes was not comfortable. It was not kind to anyone in the short term. It broke something that had looked from the outside very much like a future. But it also gave something back. It gave Tobena his name. It gave Ifeanyi his son. It gave Chukwuebuka his freedom. And it gave Ngozi, most painfully, the chance to become someone she could actually live with. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If this story found you today, if it reached you in whatever room you are sitting in, whatever you are carrying, whatever secret you have been telling yourself is harmless because it has not come out yet, take from it what it is offering. The window always opens. You are better off choosing the door. If you made it to the end of this story, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. The kind who stays. The kind who wants the whole truth, not just the comfortable part of it. Subscribe if you have not already. Not because we need the numbers, but because the stories we tell here are worth being present for. And share this one with someone who needs to hear it. You probably already know who that person is. Stay wise, stay honest, and we will see you in the next story.